I was standing in a backyard last weekend, holding a lukewarm beer in one of those cheap plastic chairs that feels like it's perpetually one bad decision away from collapse. 5 of us. Same age, roughly. We spent 40 minutes debating which 90s grunge band had the best bassist. Then another 20 on the specific grinding injustice of insurance premiums. It was warm. It was easy. Nobody said anything that surprised me. And at some point, I looked around and realized I was sitting inside a museum. A very comfortable, well-curated museum of the 1990s with a rotating exhibit on adult grievances. I like these people. I genuinely do. But if everyone in the room remembers exactly where they were when the Berlin Wall fell, if everyone can hum the dial-up modem tone from muscle memory, you aren't in a social circle anymore. You're in an echo chamber that has started to call itself community. The warmth is real. That's what makes it dangerous. It feels like rest when what it actually is, if you held a brain scan up to it, is slow suffocation. This comfort is a deceptive trap because staying relevant and mentally sharp requires a much more demanding kind of movement. There's a line from Alice in Wonderland that I find myself thinking about more than a grown adult probably should. The Red Queen tells Alice that in her world, you have to run as fast as you can just to stay in the same place. Stop running, and you don't stay still. You fall behind while the world moves around you. Lewis Carroll wrote it as absurdist comedy. It turns out it's also neuroscience. Your brain is not a static organ. It doesn't finish developing and then hold its form until something goes wrong. It responds to inputs, or the absence of them. The technical term is cognitive reserve, the brain's ability to absorb damage, reroute, and maintain function built across a lifetime of varied, effortful mental experience. And one of the things that builds it most consistently, according to research involving actual brain scans, is social diversity. Sitting with the same 5 people who already know every story you've ever told doesn't build much. It feels good. It costs you nothing. And your brain, which is an extremely energy-efficient machine, responds accordingly by doing almost nothing. The scientific reality of how our minds age suggests that the people we surround ourselves with act as a direct catalyst for our cognitive health. Researchers mapping the relationship between social networks and brain atrophy found something that keeps showing up across different studies and different populations. People who maintained diverse social networks, across ages, across backgrounds, across the kinds of weak ties that don't feel like friendship so much as ongoing acquaintanceship, showed measurably better cognitive function relative to the state of their brain tissue. The network was doing something the brain, alone, couldn't. The mechanism isn't mysterious. When you talk to someone who doesn't share your reference points, your brain has to work. You can't coast on shared shorthand. You have to decode unfamiliar context, track new information, update models of the world that had quietly stopped being updated. I had a conversation recently with someone about 15 years younger than me about a specific corner of the internet I'd never encountered. I understood maybe 60% of it. The other 40 required me to ask what things meant, rephrase what I'd heard to check I'd understood, and occasionally admit I had no frame for what they were describing. That discomfort you feel when you're slightly lost in a conversation with someone younger, that's not embarrassment. That's your brain being asked to do something it's been avoiding. Once you embrace this friction as a form of growth, the practical steps to diversifying your world become much clearer. The resistance to this is real, and I don't want to pretend it isn't. There's a specific exhaustion that comes from conversations where your references don't land, where the cultural shorthand you've spent decades building turns out to be useless. It's tiring in a way that talking to old friends simply isn't. And the tired part of your brain will always make a good argument for why tonight, specifically, you should just stay in the museum. The entry point is smaller than people think. You don't need a new best friend. Even weak ties, the new hire at the office, the person at the gym whose name you've known for 6 months but whose life you know almost nothing about, provide enough novel stimuli to register. The brain doesn't require depth. It requires difference. The useful shift is what you do when the confusion happens. When you don't understand a reference, or a platform, or why something is funny, the old response is to smile through it and move on. The new one is to ask. Not performatively, just, what does that mean? How does that work? You already know how to do this. You did it constantly in your 20s when you knew nothing. You stopped because you got comfortable enough to avoid it. That comfort is the cage. Escaping that cage is the final step in moving from a preserved past into a living, breathing future. I went back to look at the chair I'd been sitting in. Still in the corner of the backyard, still plastic, still faintly threatening. I'd spent 2 hours in that chair and learned nothing I didn't already know. That's not the fault of the people I was with. It's just what happens when every conversation is between people who have already finished building their models of the world and are now primarily engaged in defending them. A late bloomer carries something specific into a room. They know what it feels like to be wrong about a model they trusted. They've had the experience of watching a whole version of themselves quietly stop working. That's uncomfortable knowledge. It's also the exact thing that makes it easier, maybe, to be a beginner again. The research says diverse social networks moderate brain decline, that the brain, given novel inputs, compensates for damage in ways medical intervention hasn't managed to replicate, that the people who stay cognitively sharp longest are frequently the ones who kept being slightly confused by the world around them. Just find one conversation that makes you feel a little stupid. Then, have it.